Let's kick off. I want to start this off with this. If I were to ask, and I usually do in class, I have this up. If I were to ask you which of those squares, A or B, is darker than the other, I know this trick. And if you were to ask me, just looking at this image, which one is lighter and which one is darker, I would say A is a darker square, B is a lighter square. That's just the way it looks. Let me show you what the reality is. So if I grab B and bring it to A, you'll see not only are they the same square, but the letters are the same as well. A, the square seems darker, and A, the letter seems darker than B. And that's no trick. If I take A and bring it down to B, same story. This A seems lighter than that A. There's no gradient effect on here. Feel free to analyze my Photoshop layers. There's no other trick than what your brain is doing to you. And that trick is the context of what is around these squares is causing you to read them in a particular way. Everything from the pattern on the checkerboard to the size of this cylinder and the fact that it's lighter here and darker there, this gradated, what we're reading as a shadow. Your brain is sort of keyed to contextualize what it's seeing. And so the context is the only thing that's changing what's happening here. A is going from being surrounded by these lighter squares through this gradient area to where it's being surrounded by these darker squares. And as a result, it looks like it lightens up. If I were to take part of B and just scale it up, you can see if I make that bridge, it's the same value. And when I say value, I mean light and dark. That's the same square. The only thing that's different is the name of the letter, A versus B. That's how much of a liar your brain is to you about what you are seeing. Let's take a look at this in effect on an actual object, in this case a sphere. I have the parts of light and shadow listed over here to the right, and these are the same ones that are on the PDF handout. Please study that handout, get to know it backwards and forwards. Make sure you have each part of it memorized, know how they behave. It's going to help your shading immensely to know what it is you're looking at and what you're looking for. So let's grab the lightest things that I can see. In this case, it's either the highlight here, maybe some of the table there. And I'm just going to grab that and move it over. So I just learned something, and it's that even though the highlight looks white out here, it's actually not white. My background here is white, so I can see the highlight is just a little bit off from pure white. So that's already something my brain was trying to tell me, was that that highlight is screaming white. No, it's not really. And that doesn't mean you can't use white for the highlight. It just means that it being the lightest thing is already a little darker than full white. And think like white of the page here. Every other thing is darker than that. And so it's all going to need to be darker probably than you think it is. So let's carry on with the center light. And remember, that's where the light is striking the object directly, not the reflection of the light source, which is the highlight, but where the light is striking the object. So I'm just going to grab a few samples of that. Okay, and there we see it's darker still. This one gets a little bit close to the highlight, but if I were to keep sampling out here, we'd see that this center light area kind of is in this value range. It's a little darker than the highlight, and you can fudge it that direction, just slightly darker than highlight. Halftone, we remember, is this area of the light right before the form turns into shadow. If I pull from there, wow, look how dark that is. So darker still. And the halftone is actually quite a lot darker than it seems. I'm going to skip this core shadow here and move into the reflected light. And this is a part people tend to struggle in their drawings. They will make this reflected light a lot lighter than it should be. They'll say, oh, it looks like the light side, and they'll make it this value that the center light seems to be. But if I pull this over, you can see the reflected light is darker than the halftone, or maybe gets close to the halftone. My advice would be make the reflected light darker than the halftone. Look how dark that part of the reflected light is. Okay, let's move up into the core shadow. This will be the darkest part of the form. That's the sphere. You can see how dark that core shadow is. And then I'll pull some cast shadow. Super dark. That cast shadow has an asterisk there because the cast shadow actually depends a lot on what the object is that's getting that cast shadow cast onto it. So if I have black velvet, that cast shadow is going to be jet black. But if it's a white tablecloth and the ambient light in the room is high, that will be lighter in value. So the surface that the object is sitting on affects that cast shadow quite a lot. So it's a bit changeable. One thing to look at here then is where our division is going to be between light and shadow, and that's going to look like this. If I draw this line between the halftone, which is part of the light, and the reflected light, which is part of the shadow, this is the value relationship that we should try to keep going in the drawing. Halftone doesn't get any darker than this mid value here. Reflected light doesn't get any lighter than that mid value and maybe a little bit darker. If you can keep this division in mind, if you can keep your values separate, keep your light on one part of your value scale and your shadow on the other part of your value scale, and keep them separate throughout your whole drawing, your sense of light and shadow and your sense of volume in the form that you're drawing is going to be greatly increased because you're keeping your value structure intact. It's making sense. You're showing us what is light and what is shadow, and you're being consistent. And your drawing will communicate that to us very effectively. Regardless of what you're seeing, you know that this is what the values should be doing, and so you keep that going in the drawing.